noches a todos, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Comenzamos nuestra primera sesión internacional con nuestros primeros invitados especiales, Laura Prinsloo y Eka Kurniawan. Les voy a contar un poquito, muy brevemente, quiénes son ellos, porque es realmente una gran oportunidad. Es un gran honor tenerlos a ellos aquí, ha sido muy complicado. Lo primero que quiero es dar muy especialmente las gracias a Laura Prinsloo, porque su actuación, su generosidad y su modo visionario de trabajar han sido esenciales para que ellos puedan estar aquí, para que ellos puedan haber conseguido que Yakarta, después de una conversación nuestra previa, el año pasado, haya sido brillantemente Ciudad UNESCO invitada a nuestra Feria del Libro, como así lo pudimos comprobar con la brillante intervención de Laura durante la ceremonia oficial de presentación y de inauguración de la Feria del Libro ayer en el patio del Ayuntamiento. Bien. Yo le voy a hacer unas cuantas preguntas muy breves a Laura para que nos cuente un poquito sobre Yakarta como ciudad de la literatura, y también quisiera preguntarle para que compartiera con nosotros por qué cree ella que es importante ser ciudad de la literatura, como Granada lo es, y qué cosas buenas tiene ser algo así. Porque que nosotros estemos aquí juntos, convirtiéndonos en nuevos amigos, es posible gracias a que el año pasado tuvo lugar en Ljubljana, capital de Eslovenia, una reunión internacional, una reunión mundial de ciudades UNESCO de la literatura, ¿no? ¿Se me oye bien? ¿Se oye bien? ¿Oís bien? Pero ellos oyen bien la traducción. Perfecto. ¿Quién? Ah, no. Ahora. Ay. Hola, está. En Ljubljana, en noviembre del año pasado, tuvimos una reunión mundial de ciudades UNESCO. En esa reunión, Laura salió al escenario a contar un programa especial que tiene el Ministerio de Cultura de la República de Indonesia, que consiste en la gestión de lo que ellos llaman la gestión del talento nacional. La gestión del talento nacional. Y es un programa que consiste, entre muchas otras cosas, no solo en el fomento de la internacionalización de los autores de Indonesia. Después de que ella hablase, nosotros entablamos una conversación en la cual yo le expliqué que teníamos un proyecto en nuestra Feria del Libro consistente en la internacionalización de la Feria del Libro, según la cual cada año invitamos a una ciudad UNESCO de literatura a ser la ciudad especial UNESCO invitada. Y le pregunté si ella veía posible que Yakarta lo fuese al año siguiente, este año. Ella me dijo que sí, que podíamos intentarlo buscando una subvención especial de ese programa especial del Ministerio de Cultura, y ha sido posible, gracias a su buen hacer, a mi idea inicial, a su recepción tan generosa y a su fantástico buen hacer, es posible, y aquí estamos. Estamos haciendo nuevos amigos, hay escritores impresionantes, ahora vamos a hablar de ellos, de Phoebe Indirani, de Zoe Etienne Marchin y Eka Kurniawan, que está aquí al lado mío, y es muy raro tenerlos aquí. Pertenecen a una tradición literaria fortísima, impresionante, muy relevante, y que es poco conocida para nosotros, y yo considero que es una verdadera suerte, un lujo que los podamos tener aquí, que podamos disfrutar de su sabiduría, de su inteligencia, de su cultura, y que podamos así hacernos un poquito menos localistas, un poquito más universalistas, un poquito más sabios. Así que les doy las gracias a todos ellos, desde luego a Laura, a Eka, Phoebe, Zoe, Dita, por poder estar aquí, por el gran esfuerzo que habéis hecho por estar aquí. Bueno, antes de entrar en harina, un poquito más, os cuento primero unas pocas cuestiones de Laura para que sepáis un poco quién es Laura. Bueno, Laura es una reconocidísima profesional de la gestión cultural y de la edición en Indonesia, una profesional muy relevante. Ella es focal point de Yakarta UNESCO City of Literature. Es más o menos la posición equivalente a la que yo tengo como como coordinador del programa Granada Ciudad UNESCO de Literatura, pero ella es muchas cosas más. Por ejemplo, es delegada de ese programa que he dicho antes de gestión del talento nacional del Ministerio de Cultura de la República de Indonesia. Ella es fundadora también de una importante organización sin ánimo de lucro que promueve el ecosistema literario de Indonesia mediante intercambios interculturales y plataformas que conectan la narrativa indonesia con el mundo. Ha ostentado importantes cargos institucionales en el ámbito de la edición y de la cultura en su país. Por ejemplo, ella ha sido presidenta del Comité Nacional del Libro de Indonesia, nada menos, entre los años 2016 y 2019. Y ella ha sido también directora ejecutiva de un importante evento que se realiza allí en Yakarta, que es el Jakarta Book City. Ha sido la directora ejecutiva del Jakarta Book City entre el año 19 y 21. Pero como ella ha sido muchas más cosas en la vida, también trabajó en el sector bancario años antes. O sea que ella viene de ahí, de ese mundo. Ella estuvo en Nueva Zelanda y luego se incorporó a la industria editorial en su propio país. Muchísimas gracias, Laura. Gracias. Y sobre Eka Kurniawan, el impresionante escritor que tengo aquí a mi lado, quiero contaros unas cuantas cosas, muy breves, pero unas cuantas. Él es una de las voces más potentes y relevantes de la actual literatura contemporánea indonesia. Aquí es donde lo tenéis, aquí está. Y él es autor de esta novela impresionante que os recomiendo muchísimo, que ha sido traducida a una treintena de lenguas, que publicó Lumen en España hace pocos años. Se llama La belleza es una herida y que os recomiendo muchísimo que corráis a comprarla si no la tenéis o si no la habéis leído. Eka va a estar aquí mañana también, de modo que si por lo que sea no lográis una firma de Eka en su libro, yo sé que se venden varias casetas de la feria, pero seguro que se vende en la de la librería Picasso y hay ejemplares de sobra, de modo que os recomiendo vivamente, os encarezco a que os hagáis con un ejemplar de La belleza es una herida, que es una gran novela, una impresionante novela. Seguro que os da muchas ganas de ir a por ella cuando oigáis a Eka hablar de su libro, ¿vale? Bueno, él nace en el año 75 y él es filósofo de formación. Él dijo en una entrevista con el Diario Ideal el otro día, que realizamos una entrevista con el Diario Ideal, que está publicado en el Diario Ideal en el medio digital. Él dijo que no se sentía tanto filósofo como alguien que había estudiado filosofía. A mí me gustaría preguntarle también un poquito sobre la relación entre la filosofía y su obra, si nos da tiempo. Él escribe en lengua indonesia y le voy a pedir a Eka Kurniawan que en un momento dado de esta noche, dentro de un rato al final, que lea la primera página y media de La belleza es una herida en su lengua original indonesia. No para que la entendamos, sino para que escuchemos el sonido maravilloso de su lengua y a continuación yo leeré en español, en castellano, esa primera página y media. Un poco para que veáis cómo comienza una novela tan importante como esta. Pero sobre todo quiero que oigamos el maravilloso sonido de su lengua, ¿no? Él la publicó en el año 2002 originariamente. Luego ha empezado a tener un recorrido internacional muy amplio hasta poder ser publicada por Lumen aquí en España. Luego publicó en 2004 Hombre Tigre, que también está en España, en la editorial Armaenia. Hombre Tigre se llama, os la recomiendo también muchísimo. Se publicó en el Reino Unido, traducida al inglés, en el año 15, y con esa traducción Eka Kurniawan ganó el Financial Times Emerging Voices Award en el 16 y llegó a finalista, nada menos que del Man Booker International Prize. Hombre Tigre. Además de su obra de ficción, escribe ensayos literarios y artículos de opinión, política, en medios locales e internacionales. Recibió el premio Prince Claus en 2018 y actualmente reside en Yakarta. Bueno, su obra ha sido traducida, como he dicho, y leída en muchos países, y en ella conviven la historia, la violencia, el humor y lo sobrenatural de una manera muy particular. Bueno, muchas gracias, Eka, por estar aquí. Gracias por haber hecho el esfuerzo de tantas horas de viaje para venir aquí a Granada. Bueno, vamos a comenzar. De la misma manera que hemos hecho siempre, les invito a esta conversación y, por supuesto, en cualquier momento, no solo en el espacio final reservado a las preguntas de público, que así lo haremos, sino si en cualquier momento, al hilo del lance de cualquier cuestión que planteemos en la conversación, alguno de ustedes quiere plantear alguna cosa o intervenir, por supuesto, es una conversación abierta, están invitadísimos, ¿vale? Bueno, vamos a comenzar con lo que yo quiero que sea una conversación relajada y distendida, como entre amigos, entre los amigos que somos. Bueno, Laura, tú eres la focal point de Yakarta como ciudad UNESCO de la literatura. ¿En qué año entra Yakarta en este grupo tan selecto y por qué crees tú? A mí me interesa mucho que intentes comunicar al público aquí en Granada, ¿por qué crees tú que es importante para tu ciudad ser ciudad UNESCO de la literatura y por qué crees tú que es en general importante serlo y qué beneficios crees tú que da? Porque Granada lo es y Yakarta lo es. Adelante, Laura.
Hello. Thank you for having me. If I can tell a little story about how Jakarta became the city of literature. Who's been to Indonesia? Who's been to Indonesia? Okay, one person. Yeah. Who knows about Indonesia other than Bali? Okay. Who knows that Indonesia has amazing writers? Only one person.
Same guy.
When you hear about Indonesia, typically, especially in Europe or further away, it's either about Bali or something bad. Terrorism, natural disaster, what else? Nothing good. Nothing about Indonesian food. Where can you find Indonesian food here? It's hard. So, not many people know much about Indonesia. We have 17,000 islands, 280 million people. That's a lot. Because of that big population, our publishers are used to selling books to Indonesians. That's where the big market is. We used to buy 80% of the books published in Indonesia are rights purchased from overseas and translated to Indonesian. But we, as a nation, we have a culture of storytelling. Each island has its own story, legends, narratives, but it's only being told across Indonesia. So only recently, by recently I mean maybe in the last 15 years, that we realized that these stories need to travel, yeah? And because, and to do that, we need a network. So what better way to use the network that UNESCO City of Literature already has? When we got the designation in 2021, there were about 47 cities that are part of the network, and majority are European cities. Yeah. So that's the best time for us to step in because we were the first city in Southeast Asia to be part of the network. And because of that designation, we are able to be here, to be speaking in Granada, And I'm sure this is the first time you see an Indonesian writer on this stage, is it?
It is, absolutely.
So we need these dialogues, and it's not easy to bring Indonesian writers across unless you are part of a network. And because this is more than just a network, it's a friendship. We are able to be relaxed and have an informal conversation like this.
Muy bien, una excelente respuesta. Por eso estamos aquí, ¿no? Celebrando que somos ciudades hermanas en eso, ¿no? En la literatura y en la red UNESCO. Muy bien. Ahora volvemos a Yakarta. Ha dicho una cosa muy interesante, Laura, y es esas cosas raras que conocemos, o malas que conocemos, o no conocemos o desconocemos sobre Indonesia. Y yo quería preguntarle a Eka, al autor de La belleza es una herida, por quizá tirando de un cliché que me parece que es incorrecto, y seguramente él estará un poco cansado de que se lo digan, que es el cliché de la literatura indonesia contemporánea o de su novelística, como porque es un label que se puede vender aquí bien, del realismo mágico, ¿no? Su novela forma parte de ese concepto que nosotros conocemos aquí, porque lo tenemos muy vinculado con la literatura hispanoamericana, que es el realismo mágico. Yo no sé si tú estás un poco harto o cansado, o si te molesta ese cliché del realismo mágico, ¿no? De una novela donde suceden cosas que supuestamente no suceden en lo que consideramos normalmente en Occidente como realidad, entre comillas todo. Y quería preguntarte sobre si ese realismo mágico como cliché tú lo vinculas más con lo que teóricamente se ha estabulado como lo que tiene que ver con la narrativa hispanoamericana del siglo XX, o no tiene nada que ver, o tiene más que ver con lo que decía Laura del storytelling, de las islas, de los pueblos, de la tradición oral, de la cantidad de historias que se cuentan y de la visión mágica que hay entre los pueblos de tu país. Me gustaría que, para empezar, exploraras un poco cómo te has planteado toda esa cuestión de lo no realista en tu narrativa, y especialmente en esta novela.
Thank you and good evenings. Thank you, Laura, to invite me here, and Jesus and everybody to accept me in Granada. About the realism images, of course, a lot of people always ask me about that. Usually if I went to like a book fair or book talking in some foreign city, usually I answer that actually I understand that why some people or some reader or critic said that my book, my novel is have magic realism elements in it. I understand a lot about that because, of course, I read a lot some Latin American novels like Garcia Marquez, Jorge Borges, and many more. But yes, I think I owe it to them. They influence me. Half of influence is from the writers I read around the world, including the Latin American writers. Because when I was a student in university, before interested with Latin American literature, actually I interest more to Latin American politics. Because the times I was involved in student movements, and I saw that social politically Latin American is a little bit similar with Indonesia. We have a kind of society that combinations of military dictatorship, and then there is conservatism of religions like with a little bit different in Latin America. Of course, a lot of people is in Catholic, but in Indonesia is Muslim, and then both of the community Latin America and Indonesia is post-colonial countries. So I used to compare both of the Latin America and Indonesia, and I was like there is a lot of similarity, and after interest with their politics, and then I start to read their literature, and I'm very impressed that many of Latin America talk about this kind of element, politics, religions, and even the mysticisms in very well in their works. So I think I want to do a little bit like the similar thing with Indonesia. But when I start to write, I just remember because this is my first novel, and I didn't know how to write novel actually. So I just read against what I read in my teenager. When I was at school, I used to read like horror novels and some martial art novel, and actually it's in Indonesia you used to call it sastra picisan, is like a cheap literature because it's just for entertainment, but I really like it. So when I start to write the novel, I try to combine what I like about those novel. The novel about like horror story is actually kinds of, there is a ghost who there is a person who being killed because of the injustice society, and then and he or she become ghost to revenge, and so she or he revive again to kill someone who very evil. So actually, when I start to write this novel, what I thought is just to rewrite like horror novel. So later I will read the first chapter, or the first few paragraph of my novel. It's actually open with kind of horror elements, like a woman came from the grave and then alive again. It's actually like a template in horror novel in Indonesia, or even in the Indonesian movie. But when I start to write, I want to combine it with Indonesian history, Indonesian Muslim society, Indonesians it's like I want to write a horror novel, but at the same time want to write like Indonesian history for like 70 years in the making. So I think the element of realism and the magic, or the something fantastical is came from both ways. I know this is not original actually. Of course, Latin American is very popular with magic realism, but at the same time, I think this kind of genre is already written by a lot of writer. If you read Nikolai Gogol, is actually there is a fantastic element in his stories. Or if you read Kafka, Metamorphosis is similar. So I think I think the realism magic is like term for came maybe in 70 to sell Latin American literature, but and then spread to a lot of work. Like as far as I remember, when Günter Grass won the Nobel Prize, suddenly people thought that the Tin Drum is a magic realism too, which of course is very different culture, very different. But yes, in the Tin Drum there is a magical element too. So I think, or in contemporary writers like Haruki Murakami, is a lot of fantastical element. So I think I understand why some critic said that my novel is realism magic, but I think it's a little bit different with the others.
Es decir, que utilizas la ficción para contar la historia de tu país también, ¿no? O sea que en tu novela sale seguramente, no sé si sale, cuéntanos cómo sale la colonización holandesa, la invasión japonesa en el siglo XX o la dictadura de Suharto. Todo eso está detrás. Tú usas la ficción conscientemente para poder contar mejor o de otra manera la historia.
Yeah, my first novel is actually I want to write Indonesian history, but in a different way. Like it's not actually historical fictions, but both I think both foreign readers and Indonesian reader maybe will read it in a different way, like for someone who didn't understand Indonesian history, maybe they can learn a little bit from my novel about colonialism era, Japanese, like I already said, Japanese and then Suharto era, and yeah. But maybe for Indonesians, actually those chronicle is very known. Even student from primary school already learn about that. But maybe they can see like irony or sarcasm in it, because there is kind of a lot of layer, like some character actually model from the real person, and there is a kind of humor that maybe only Indonesian reader understand, but for foreigner maybe it can be like a magical or information something.
El otro día nos contaste una historia muy interesante que pasó con tu familia. No sé si me gustaría que la volvieras a contar otra vez, si quieres, sobre esa cuestión de la magia, ¿no? Que en tu casa, con tu familia, con tu madre y con tu mujer, creo que se había perdido un elemento en la casa. ¿Nos puedes contar esa microhistoria? Porque es una anécdota menor, pero me parece que ayuda a entender también, desde nuestro punto de vista de desconocedores casi absolutos de la sociedad en tu país, un poco cómo se aprecian cosas cotidianas de la realidad. ¿Podrías volver a contar esa historia, la historia que contaste el otro día con el periodista?
In that conversation, I asked the journalist because he thinks that my novel is like already we're talking about realism magic, but I said that what is realism? Because in Indonesia, many people will think that the ghost is realistic. So I thought this little story about my wife and my daughter. A few days ago, my daughter lost her clothes. We don't know where it is. Even until now, I asked her. She still cannot find her clothes. But that time when my wife heard about the cloth being missing, she just said to someone there is not in the house. She just said, please return the cloth, please return the cloth. So, but yes, she is the one who believes in ghosts in the house. And she is not the only ones in the whole Indonesian society, because almost many people believe in something spirit, ghosts, and yeah.
¿Y qué nos puedes contar sobre Hombre Tigre, tu segunda novela, la que escribiste después de La belleza es una herida? Yo no la he leído, pero tengo la impresión de que es una historia más concentrada o más concreta, más específica, más centrada en puntos concretos, y no sé si eso es así, Me gustaría que nos contases de qué trata, que nos dices una paráfrasis del contenido de lo narrado. ¿Qué historia se cuenta en Hombre Tigre? Y si crees que también a través de esa novela has intentado abordar cuestiones de la historia de tu país, igual que tu anterior novela, La belleza es una herida, o tiene una estrategia narrativa completamente distinta. Me gustaría que nos lo contaras un poquito.
It's a little bit different strategy. Is very small, just maybe 200 pages. It's about a boy who possessed by a tiger, white tiger, and he killed his neighbor, an old man. And when the police found out that he was the murderer, he said he just said to the authority that it is not him who killed his neighbor. It is the tiger inside his body. I had a background story about that. It's a little bit funny, similar with the story about my wife. Back then, a few years ago, I was a student in Yogyakarta. I was a student, like you already know, I study philosophy, and in our dormitory, in dorm, I have neighbors who came from the same city from me, but I just know they're in Yogyakarta. We are from the same city in Tasikmalaya. He was in the room, and the door was closed, and I was outside, sit in the chair like this, and then I heard something fall in the room. So I asked my friends, what happened inside? And then the door opened, my friend came out and said, she said, I was fall because there is a tiger block my way. It's like the other people, the other students there didn't understand about the story. Only I and my friends know. Because in Tasikmalaya, in Sundanese, we believe some people have connections with the tiger, the magical tiger, who sometimes can possess or sometimes can come from nowhere to protect someone. So he said that the tiger is sent by his uncle because he think that he was in danger. But of course, nobody can see the tiger, only he. But the story is keep in my mind for many years because I heard a lot about this magical tiger at my hometowns. So when I was write my second novel, it's actually a crime fiction, a crime fiction about someone's murder another ones, and then he denied the murderer and blamed the tiger inside him. So I just wrote the story and back and the flashback to the magical creatures and to what the society believe. And then, it's actually a little bit like a crime fiction, but we know who is the murderer, who is the victim, but what we don't know is the motive of the killing, and and maybe some reader will ask, this white tiger is real or just psychological? For me, it's up to the readers.
Muy interesante, ganas enormes de leerla. Y hay otra novela tuya que tiene un título muy interesante, muy bueno, que en español, en traducción, es algo así como La venganza es mía, los demás pagan en efectivo. A ver, Óscar Jiménez, ¿cómo la traduce? La venganza es mía, los demás pagan en efectivo. Que creo que es del año 14, no está traducida al español, que yo sepa. Con un título tan atractivo como este, la verdad es que se me dispara la curiosidad y las ganas de poderla leer. Vamos a intentar poderla leer en español pronto, pero ¿qué nos podrías contar? ¿Qué nos cuentas de esta novela? ¿Sigues avanzando? ¿Sigues evolucionando en tu ficción narrativa o hay recurrencias con las anteriores dos novelas? ¿De qué trata? ¿De qué trata esta novela?
It's actually about a boy coming to age novel who cannot erection. So the opening paragraph is nobody can be brave enough rather than someone who cannot have erections or something like that. It's about actually it's like a tribute to martial art novel in Indonesia. So I just want to write a novel basically like a martial art novels with the setting in 80. But at the same time, I want to retell about the violence under the Suharto era because it's like there is a parallelism in 80, the 70, 80. There is a very popular martial art novels. It's like very popular genre. Of course, it's martial art novel full of violence. But in the real life, it's the years of very violence too. After the tragedy in 65, in early in 80, there is many we call it penembak misterius. It's like mysterious kill murderers actually doing, but the military who kill like a thug or petite criminal and so I want to write like ironically it's a martial art novel, but at the same it's a criticism to violence who doing but that status. So we follow the characters that are actually mentioned that he is a young boy who once witnessed a woman being raped by the two police officer, and he was being traumatized, and because of that events he cannot have erection, so he very frustrated. Because he very frustrated, he being so violent, he asked everybody to fight with him until one day she fall in love with another girl who have another background who very traumatized too, and they each other train in fighting and fight each other, but in the end fall in love. But after some events, our character is kill the very big like a mafia, and then she going to the jail for many years, and then the second part is he try to face his reality, so he became a truck driver, so it's like it's similar like a truck driver in Indonesia, who especially in Malopa is very very violent too. But this character want to change his life. She don't want to fight anymore. Even all the truck or the people in the street want to fight him because he is the one who killed the very famous mafia boss. So he want to fight with him, but he don't want to fight anymore because there is his wife. Actually, before he went to the jail, his wife killed the other people, and then his wife were going to jail too. So he just wait his wife to return.
Interesante, me interesa muchísimo. Y para acabar con la cuestión novelística, Eka, tu novela más reciente se llama en español, de nuevo un título atractivo, El perro maulla, el gato ladra. Creo que se va a publicar pronto al inglés, este año quizá, puede ser. ¿De qué trata? Por favor, cuéntanos. El perro maulla, el gato ladra.
This my latest novels published in Indonesia 2 years ago. In English, already published this month. Is about a boy too, but the different themes is about the relation between the boy and his father and the religion, Islam. So it's about how it's often when the boy being circumstances and his father told him that from this day you become a pious boy. So he have to pray, he have to go to the mosque, he have to fasting and so yeah. But actually, she don't want to do that. So it's like being the how a boy grow up in a very conservative family, but at the same time he want to have his own freedoms and not. So one day his father died, and he thinks that everything is stopped, so nobody can ask him to pray anymore, and nobody have to force him going to mosque. So he lived very free, and then he found another boy of his friend at school who very religious, and he tried to bring this boy to left the religion too.
No eludes los temas espinosos, los temas graves, importantes y los temas complicados. Veo que no los eludes, ni tampoco los eluden las escritoras de Indonesia y de Yakarta que están aquí con nosotros, que como podréis ver mañana, son unos acercamientos a las cuestiones de la realidad muy radicales, muy potentes, yo me atrevería a decir que poco conocidas entre nosotros, o poco transitadas. Me parece que vuestra literatura, por lo poco que sé muy poco, es muy radical, entra con mucha valentía, sin miedo en cuestiones graves y difíciles. Tú escribes también artículos políticos en medios importantes de tu país, ¿correcto? ¿Es así? Escribes en prensa, escribes opinión política.
Yeah, I used to write twice a month in Java Post, maybe 4 years, almost every 2 weeks. Sometimes I wrote. This is like a day-to-day issue, like what happens in politics, what happens in society. So yeah, it's a little bit different with write a story novels. But I think there is. I think when I wrote columns or stories, I used to think all this work is very political. So. I'll write about a boy with his fathers, or about a teenager who cannot having erections. I think there is always political in this case. So I just when I wrote in Men Tigers, actually like the relation between the boy and his neighbor and his father is like for me it's like metaphorical, like the state, the state and the people, and how like how we see the patriarchs not only in the big state, but we can see it in the small household. Yeah, I think so. Whenever I write about essay or stories, it's only the form is different, but actually the what I try to write is usually similar.
¿Cómo ve un intelectual como tú, un escritor relevante en tu país, uno de los más relevantes en tu país, el estado geopolítico mundial? Es decir, ¿cómo se ve todas las cuestiones que a nosotros nos interesan muchísimo y las vemos desde aquí, desde España? Estamos en Europa, por supuesto nuestra visión es muy diferente de la vuestra. Aquí estamos, todo el mundo lo sabe, todos los que estamos aquí seguro que lo sabemos, estamos muy preocupados por la deriva geopolítica global, ¿no? Y por todas las cuestiones, las guerras que hay ahora mismo y demás. ¿Cómo se visualiza, por ejemplo, una cuestión como el imperio norteamericano, el actual presidente de los Estados Unidos, o las guerras en las que están implicados, la situación tan inestable internacionalmente, tan peligrosa, tan fácilmente decantable hacia situaciones que no queremos casi ni imaginar ni nombrar? Aquí hay alguien que quiere hablar. Desde Yakarta, desde Indonesia, desde vuestro lado del mundo, ¿cómo se visualiza desde allí todo esto que nosotros aquí entendemos con una tensión como muy grande, porque estamos en Europa? ¿Cómo ves tú, que eres filósofo y que publicas artículos de opinión política en diarios importantes de tu país, toda esta cuestión? Si es que lo puedes resumir en 5 minutos.
Yeah, I think as someone who sometimes I follow the geopolitical, the global politics, but sometimes I only see Indonesian politics, and it's like I have two different minds. Like first, I used to become realistic. Like every country have their own interests. Like maybe Indonesian interest will be different with the Spain, with whatever. Like for example, with other country in Europe. But at the same time, of course, my other man have kind of idealistic, for example, we should defend the weakest part. Like for example, let's say the genocide in Israel, in Palestine. Sometimes I'm very frustrated with the European country. How do you say that you always told about the humanity or whenever, but you being blind with what happened in Palestine, for example. But at the same time, I understand you have their own interests, of course. So I have a kind of human. I know the other country interest, but at the same time, I'm very frustrated because I have kind of idealistic.
Ok. Había una palabra por ahí pedida, ¿no? ¿Querías tú decir? Stan, adelante, por favor. Por supuesto, claro que sí. Adelante. Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Okay, I will maybe make it in English to let you understand immediately. Yeah, thank you for being here. And what catch my interest, actually, you were mentioning your interest to Latin America, and you were saying that you were inspired, if I understood it right, and connected well to it. So if this also works for your political writing, I was asking what common lines you see, or what is the inspiration you get from the Latin America if you relate it to Indonesia. Because like for me, for example, Latin America is not only about violence and about dictatorship and so on, but it's also about dreaming, about utopias, right? About some visions for a good future. So do you also draw these lines, and do you also see this in Indonesia, like the utopian part, the good part, the prospect part for the future? Is this something also which catches your interest?
Yeah, I think that's I try to make alliance between me and many Latin Americans works because I sense too about the utopia I love, for example, I love George Louis Borges' short stories very much because, yeah, of course, maybe it's very personal. There is a lot of philosophical questions in his work, but at the same time, I don't want to write something like that because I think it makes us writers and maybe readers being a little bit apolitical. So sometimes because I think yeah, it's sometimes Borges not very strong enough to make a commentary about the Argentines or Latin America, and I used to love some of Marquez works, for example, but yeah, sometimes especially his previous works, sometimes his work is too magical, too fairy tales. The gap between the story and the reality is too far away for me. So I just want to write something closer. So I inspired with his work, but of course I want to write something very closer. The magic maybe is still there, so, but when people read my works, they sense the reality. They sense that it happens in the real country, real places. So it's not something fairy tale about it. So. Yeah.
Selamat malam. Buenas tardes in Indonesia. I'm going to ask in English as well. So, I'm Ralph. I'm a writer from the Philippines, from the same part of the world, Southeast Asia, and I feel like in terms of diffusion of literature from Southeast Asia, at least here in Europe, I feel like we're underrepresented as a region. But what makes me envious here in Europe is that they have a lot of translation between countries. The Spanish translate from French into Spanish. The Spanish don't read French books in English or don't read German books in English. They read German books, French books, Indonesian books in Spanish. But among us in Southeast Asia, we don't have a strong culture of translation between each other. We translate into other languages, from Tagalog to English, from Bahasa Indonesia to English, from Thai to English. But we don't translate from Tagalog to Bahasa. We don't translate from Bahasa to Tagalog, Bahasa to Thai. I think it's because I don't know why exactly, but I feel like there's always something lost, especially since if we're using English, there are concepts that are hard to translate. For instance, gram or rindu that I feel like can be translated to Tagalog as gigil or pangungulila because we have a common cultural background. We come from the same space. But when we engage in each other's works through a third European language, English, there's something lost when we could express it better if we translate between each other. I think that's something we can learn from the Europeans because they have a strong culture of translation between each other. So I'm wondering, what is your opinion on this? And do you think it's possible to develop such a culture of translation that we can celebrate each other's works in each other's native languages in Southeast Asia? Terima kasih. Muchas gracias.
Actually, I speak about this theme a few years ago, actually in one of your university in Manila, about the strange case of Southeast Asia. We can travel to this country. Like I can go to Manila, to Bangkok, just bring our passport. But tourism is very well developed between this country, but at the same time we didn't read each other. The problem, of course, we use very different language from each other. Maybe only Indonesia and Malaysia with a little with similarity language, but between Indonesia and Philippines, it's very different language, so we don't understand each other. And with Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia and the whole 10 countries didn't understand each other. But I said that the similar case is happen in Europe because Europe, every country have their own language. Maybe many countries have the same root. Actually, Indonesians, Malaysia, Philippines, they have the same root too. But the language is too far away now. But I said in Europe, they have the kind of history to translate each other from a very long time. If I think like Don Quixote is already known since very very long time ago, or how Tolstoy and Dostoevsky is being translated into French a long time ago. So I said the only solution is we have to translate to each other. But there's the kind of problems after I mentioned that the only one that we can do that to translate, for example, Indonesian's novel to Tagalog and to Thai to Vietnam is through the English versions. That actually it doesn't work because, like I already said, we for now it's still hard to translate it directly because it's very hard to find a good translator between this language. So I think maybe here there is a Laura. Maybe you can find this kind of solutions. How we can doing workshop or anything. To find this translator to at least this Southeast Asian country because it's very big problem. It's easier for me to find a translator for Norwegians to of course French, Spanish or other European language is easier rather than to find a translator from Philippines, from Thailand, Vietnam. So it's I think I don't know. Because I don't even know our own president, so I cannot talk to him.
¿Alguna pregunta?
Bueno, son ya más de las 10 de la noche, ya va siendo hora. Bueno, a mí me gustaría saber muchas cosas personales de él, me gustaría pues conocerlo mejor, me gustaría preguntarle también cosas de rituales, cómo escribe cada día, cuándo se levanta, cómo es una jornada tuya. Me gustaría preguntártelo muy brevemente para que conteste muy brevemente, que ya nos vamos a ir. ¿Cómo es una jornada de trabajo tuya diaria? Es un tema que me interesa mucho. ¿Cuándo escribes? ¿Cómo escribes? ¿Cuáles son tus rituales, tus manías?
I usually wake up at 6 or 7 because it's like a body clock. So I will wake up at 6 and then sit doing nothing because my daughter have to prepare to go to school. But because I cannot work while she just appear here and there. But after she goes to school at 8, so I can write or read this. Actually, it's just between reading and writing. And maybe at 12, I used to doing siesta. Like it's Indonesia. It's very hot at 12 o'clock, so I go to sleep again. And really doing writing usually is very very productive. Is in the afternoon to even to until midnight. So yes, that's my daily life. It's very simple.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Eka. Bueno, Eka va a estar con nosotros mañana, se lo advierto y se lo aviso y se lo recuerdo, con la conversación que vamos a tener entre Marina Tapia y Phoebe Indirani y Zoe Tien Marchen en la Sala Zaida mañana a las 8:30. Si Eka Kurniawan es un autor radical, potente, interesante, las dos escritoras que vamos a descubrir mañana son impresionantemente igual de radicales y de intensas y de interesantes sus propuestas vitales, estilísticas y literarias y filosóficas también. Así que se lo recomiendo muchísimo. También si dan con la novela de Eka, seguramente lo pueden pillar mañana para que haga una firma que seguramente tendrá mucho valor después. Así que yo se lo recomiendo que lo hagan. Me gustaría, para terminar, preguntarle a Laura, que sé que ya está, digamos, investigando las cuestiones culturales nuestras, por ejemplo, la Alhambra 1925 y otras importantes cuestiones culturales nuestras. Sé que Laura está haciendo una gran investigación al respecto. Mañana ellos se van junto con Alicia Choín, se van a la Alhambra por la mañana, van a pasar una jornada impresionante en la Alhambra, creo que lo van a disfrutar y tengo mucha curiosidad por saber cuál es su experiencia de ese paseo por la Alhambra y luego por el Albaicín. Luego por la tarde tendremos unas entrevistas filmadas en el Centro Federico García Lorca y finalmente a las 8:30, les repito, tendremos el acto en la Sala Zaida. Laura, para terminar, para cerrar y para irnos ahora, para despedirnos, para irnos a cenar. ¿Cómo de rica te parece esta experiencia de intercambio y de comunicación entre culturas, entre personas? Nos estamos haciendo amigos, nos estamos pues conociendo, y si te parece que podemos seguir inventando futuros proyectos entre Yakarta y Granada de cara al futuro.
Of course. Every time, especially me, I don't know about the others, I go to another country and learn about their culture, the immediate reaction is always thinking the bad side of my country. For example, when I went to the City Hall, every aspect of the building, of the picture on the wall, the sword, the book, I feel like you appreciate your culture, you appreciate the history, you preserve it, you don't take it for granted. And my immediate reaction is like, we have that too, but we neglect it. We don't do this. When you do renovation, I was looking at the buildings, you do renovation, you make sure that the old facade is there. In Indonesia, no, don't care. Just make it a new modern building without appreciating the old, the history. But that's always my first reaction, always thinking why my country is not like this country. Maybe it's not the right reaction, but it always makes me feel, what can I do better for my country? So I feel like exchanges with different cultures, different countries can only make us better. And the best way is to take what we can and then build our country for the better. Yeah.
Muy bien. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, bravo. Es un aprendizaje de dirección doble. Vosotros aprendéis, nosotros aprendemos tanto como vosotros o más. Así que muchas gracias, Laura y Eka. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.